Bringing in the rain, bringing in the rain. We shall come rejoicing because we brought in the rain. At the bottom fell out about the time we got ready to come to church tonight. But prayerfully we'll miss some of those storms. We certainly are mindful of those who are in the path of these terrible storms that are north of us. Certainly mindful of their struggle at the present time. Thankfully, hopefully, prayerfully, we will not have any of those kind of damaging storms here. We're in chapter 36 in our study tonight. And I'll just state up front, we're reading one of those chapters in the Bible that often we read, and when we're finished reading it, we go, what was that about? And why do we have this in the Bible? Some commentators actually describe chapter 36 as laborious, tedious, and wondering out loud why it's here. I do not share that view. I will say there's some interesting thoughts, and I'd like to share some of those interesting thoughts, at least a couple of them in particular that come from this chapter. There are some interesting names, and I'm not suggesting to you that I know how to pronounce it. I don't know that anyone knows really how to pronounce names that were actually addressed to people that lived more than 1500 BC, a different language, different part of the world. We do the best we can to try to understand their names. But as we read these names, one thing I would like for you to ask yourself: when you are dead and gone, 1,500 years from now, will anyone speak of you and mention your name? So the fact that the name is here says something. Genesis 36, verse 1. Now this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan: Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite; Aholibamah, the daughter of Anna, the daughter of Zibeon the Hivite; and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nebajoth. Now Adah bore Eliphaz to Esau, and Basemath bore Reuel. And Aholibamah bore Jeush, Jaalam, and Korah. These were the sons of Esau, who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his household, his cattle, and all his animals, and all his goods, which he had gained in the land of Canaan, and went to a country away from the presence of his brother Jacob. For their possessions were too great for them to dwell together, and the land where they were strangers could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. And this is the genealogy of Esau, the father of the Edomites in Mount Seir. These were the names of Esau's sons: Eliphaz, the son of Adah, the wife of Esau; and Reuel, the son of Basemath, the wife of Esau. And the sons of Eliphaz were Timon, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, and Kenaz. Now Timnah was a concubine of Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bore Amalek to Eliphaz. These were the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. These were the sons of Reuel, Nahath, Zerah, Shammah, and Mizah. These were the sons of Basemath, Esau's wife. These were the sons of Aholibamah, Esau's wife, the daughter of Anna, the daughter of Zibeon, and she bore to Esau Jeush, Jaalam, and Korah. These were the chiefs of the sons of Esau. The sons of Eliphaz, the firstborn son of Esau, were Chief Timon, Chief Omar, Chief Zepho, Chief Kenaz, Chief Korah, Chief Gatam, and Chief Amalek. These were the chiefs of Eliphaz in the land of Edom. They were the sons of Adah. These were the sons of Reuel, Esau's son, Chief Nahath, Chief Zerah, Chief Shammah, and Chief Mizah. These were the chiefs of Reuel in the land of Edom. These were the sons of Basemath, Esau's wife. And these were the sons of Aholibamah, Esau's wife, Chief Jeush, Chief Jaalam, and Chief Korah. These were the chiefs who descended from Aholibamah, Esau's wife, the daughter of Anna. These were the sons of Esau, who is Edom, and these were their chiefs. These were the sons of Seir the Horite, who inhabited the land, Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anna, Dishon, Ezer, and Dishon. These were the chiefs of the Horites, the sons of Seir, in the land of Edom. And the sons of Lotan were Horah and Himam. Lotan's sister was Timnah. These were the sons of Shobal, Alvan, Manhath, Ebal, Sepho, and Onam. These were the sons of Zibeon, both Ajah and Anna. These were this was the Anna who found the water in the wilderness as he pastured the donkeys of his father Zibeon. These were the children of Anna, Dishon, and Aholibamah, the daughter of Anna. These were the sons of Dishon, Hemdan, Ishban, Ithron, and Kiron. These were the sons of Ezer, Bilhan, Zeavan, and Achan. These were the sons of Dishon, Uz, and Aran. These were the chiefs of the Horites, Chief Lotan, Chief Sobal, Chief Zibeon, Chief Anna, Chief Dishon, Chief Ezer, and Chief Dishon. These were the chiefs of the Horites according to their chiefs in the land of Seir. Now these were the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the children of Israel. Bela the son of Beor reigned in Edom. The name of his city was Dinhabah. And when Bela died, Jobab the son of Zerah of Bozrah reigned in his place. When Jobab died, Husham of the land of the Timonites reigned in his place. And when Husham died, Hadad the son of Bedad, who had attacked Midian in the field of Moab, reigned in his place. And the name of his city was Avith. When Hadad died, Samlah of Marica reigned in his place. And when Samlah died, Saul of Rehoboth by the river reigned in his place. When Saul died, Baal-Hanan the son of Atbor reigned in his place. And when Baal-Hanan the son of Atbor died, Hadar reigned in his place. And the name of the city was Pau. His wife's name was Mehet-Baal, the daughter of Matrid, the daughter of Mishhab. These were the names of the chiefs of Esau according to their families and their places by their names. Chief Timnah, Chief Alba, Chief Jetheth, Chief Aholibamah, Chief Elah, Chief Pinan, Chief Kenaz, Chief Timon, Chief Mizar, Chief Magdiel, and Chief Iram. These were the chiefs of Edom according to their dwelling places in the land of their possession. Esau was the father of the Edomites. Wow. You understand why a commentator would read this and say, okay, what was that about? Well, there are a couple of three things that are worth mentioning. Number one, as we read the narrative throughout Genesis, there's one family in particular now that we're focused upon, and it's not Esau. But it is important that we recognize Esau was remembered by God. He was not forgotten. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to assume, and I think many times we do, that when we read the Old Testament, for example, that God was solely interested in Israel and his descendants. And that's just not the case. In fact, before Israel, in the days of Abraham, the grandfather of Israel, there was another man who was not of Abraham's family, who was a great man of God. His name was Melchizedek. He was not of Abraham's family, not of that same tribe, or any way associated with him as far as we know. In fact, we know nothing of Melchizedek, where he came from, who his family was. We know nothing of his genealogical list, nothing. He had no beginning of days nor end of years. He just appeared. He's there and then he's just not there. So we don't know who he was. But we do know as we continue reading in the Old Testament, we come across, for example, in the time of Moses, who's writing this. We come across Moses in his lifetime, a man by the name of Balaam. Balaam was of what group of people? Or who was hiring Balaam? The what? The Midianites. They were hiring him. The Midianites were hiring Balaam to curse Israel because they were afraid of Israel. Was Balaam a prophet of God? Indeed he was. Was he always faithful to God? No, he was not. But he was not of the family of Israel. When you think of Jonah and his mission was to what people? The Assyrians. Were the Assyrians part of Israel? No, they were not. But what did God do? God had compassion upon the Assyrians and dispatched a preacher to the Assyrians. Apparently God had not completely given up on the Assyrians. Jonah had, and I'm sure most people in Israel had, and that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. I think many in Israel assumed, hey, we're it. We're all there is, and we're all that God is concerned about. We are the apple of his eye, period. End of discussion. No one else really matters. I think it's, whether we can observe anything else about this chapter, at least acknowledge that God knew these people by name. And you may say to yourself now, no one's going to know my name 1,500 years from now, but God will. He knows who you are. In fact, Eric, he knows the very hairs on your head, which are fewer than they were about 10 years ago. But he knows, wow, Jonathan, oh my. Well, yes, God knows how many hairs you have on your head too. That would require a greater feat in your case, but nice hair, by the way. What? I'm jealous. I can say that. Don't you think it's important to recognize, if there's nothing else we could observe, God did not forget about these people. And God has not forgotten about you. You may say, well, I'm not important. I'm not noticed. I'm not someone who makes a big splash on the headlines. I mean, I could make a speech like I'm making now, and there won't be millions of people talking about my speech like we did Donald Trump last night. We're still analyzing everything he said in his speech. What an important man, what a great man, the President of the United States. Well, we consider him to be great, and we think everyone pays attention to what he says, but God knows you. He knows everything about you. Every struggle you have, every temptation you encounter, every heartache you experience, he knows it because he knows you. And he's intimately and certainly sincerely concerned about you. And I think that's in and of itself important. Now, to note, I will say this about non-Israelite people. As a whole, generally speaking, it is the case that after a period of time, God, in essence, gave up on those Gentile nations. In fact, that's in essence what Paul said in Romans chapter 1. Let me read a section or two here. And there's a point to be made here in Romans chapter 1 about what I'm saying. In verse 21, Paul says, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. He's talking about the Gentile nations, the non-Israelite people. But notice what he says about those people. They knew God. You know, you talk to sociologists, anthropologists, and others, archaeologists, people who study ancient history and peoples of the past, and they will suggest to you, in fact it's commonly viewed today, that among the human race there was first polytheism, many gods, and eventually polytheism gave way to monotheism. And people like Abraham and others were able to bring the human race closer in line to a monotheistic view, a one God view. But that originally human beings generally served hundreds and yea, thousands of gods. That is the reverse of the case. Imagine 4 men and their wives getting off of the ark, and they come onto a freshly cleaned earth. How many of them were polytheists? How many of them were monotheists? Every single one of them. Now, when they had children and they had grandchildren and great-grandchildren, did they tell them about the world that then was? Did they tell them about God who ordered them to build? Of course they did. Did they pass down that knowledge? Yes. But at some point, that knowledge was lost. And so monotheism gave way to polytheism and not the reverse. And that's important to observe. And so we see here in Romans chapter 1, Paul saying they at one time, meaning those Gentiles, those non-Israelite nations, they knew God. But because they didn't want to retain a knowledge of God, God gave them up to do all kinds of debased things. Homosexuality was one of the chief characteristics of an entire culture that had abandoned God, which is really a wake-up call for us. The more our Western culture embraces homosexuality, it is a true sign that the heart and soul of our culture is lost, has abandoned a knowledge of God. The further away from God we become, the more we see unnatural, abnormal, and unhealthy lifestyles being embraced. So again, this is the case. And so in the time of Esau and Jacob, by the way, last week, notice what we said about Jacob himself, Israel. In his family, what was the main problem religiously before chapter 36? What do we know about Jacob and his family? They were idolaters. And so they were none of them perfect. Jacob was on a journey spiritually and throughout life, on a dual journey, and was growing in his understanding. But again, I don't want to get off on that too much. There's also something else worth noting here in this chapter with all these interesting names. Verse 31, you might not have really thought about this, but consider. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Moses lived around, roughly speaking, 1500 BC. That's roughly when the Exodus from Egypt occurred. And so we have Moses writing this book. Now, in Moses' day, was there a king in Israel? How many years after Moses transpired before there was a king in Israel? Over 300 years at least. 3 centuries at least went by, and that's a conservative counting. Could be as much as 400 went by before Saul was anointed first king in Israel. And so when you hear Moses saying something like, these were the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over there are commentators who say, here's proof that this was not written by Moses. Because Moses wouldn't have thought about a king in Israel, because there was no king contemplated in Israel. In fact, the nation wasn't fully constituted at the time of the writing of the book of Genesis. So it's really not right for us to assume that Moses would have authored this section of the book of Genesis. Well, someone could argue that, and many have. In fact, I've read a number of commentators this week who argued that very point. A redactor came along afterwards. Maybe Moses wrote most of this, but there are sections like this one where the commentator came back and the redactor came back later and added this, because Moses wouldn't have said something like that, because it just wasn't on his mind. It wasn't on his radar. Excuse me. Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 14, Moses wrote this book too. This is the 5th book of Moses. And notice what Moses said. When you come to the land which the Lord your God is giving you, and possess it, and dwell, he's talking future tense, and say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me. Now, when you remember in the days of Samuel, when the elders of Israel came to Samuel, what did they say to Samuel? They said these very words. Now, was Moses a prophet? And so when you say, I will set a king like all the nations around me, you shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. Who chose Saul? Who chose David? Who chose those kings? God did. Again, I'm not going to read all this. It'll take all of our time. But when you hear commentators making observations like this about Moses, it really is disappointing, because they're obviously woefully ignorant. If they just read what Moses wrote, they would realize that Moses actually thought a lot about a king and said a great deal about a king. Of course, speaking future tense. Can you not hear me? You can't hear me? Yes.
In reference to the line of chapter 36 that he just finished about Esau. From Moses' perspective, as he writes it, if we just go in from the human perspective, he said a whole lot about Israel.
Yes.
He's going to begin to say a whole lot more.
Yes.
Perhaps he wants to say to the Jewish reader, I haven't forgotten Esau either.
That's right. Esau's still on my radar. I still know who he is. But there's also another point in this chapter. Esau took his possessions, his flocks, his herds, and moved south, and made way for and made room for his brother.
That seems rather strange in that sense that he was supposed to have been in Edom when it went to beat his brother on his way back.
Yes. But here Moses is describing him moving there and settling there and making that his permanent dwelling.
Apparently they tried to have some confederacy after they
Yes.
united in Israel.
Indeed.
Decided it wouldn't work.
Indeed. And so now he's made this his permanent home. But I think Burton Kaufman probably was right. One of the things you can say overall from Moses' perspective is that there wasn't enough room in the land of Canaan for anyone else to rival Israel. This was to be Israel's land eventually. And so Esau is moving south. And of course that would be according to the providence of God, keeping that all that at bay. Now, I want to say this about those who would question the authorship of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And many who raise these questions are individuals who call themselves Christians. They say, I'm a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. But Jesus, when he spoke about these events, he spoke about the events in the book of Genesis as actual historical events. He spoke about Sodom and Gomorrah. He spoke about Noah. He spoke about Abraham. He spoke about all these individuals and all these events as actual events. That's number one to observe on more than one occasion. And for example, in Luke chapter 20, verse 37, notice what Jesus said in answering the Sadducees. He said, now even Moses showed in the burning bush passage, that's Exodus chapter 3, that the dead are raised when he called the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. For he is not the God of the dead, but the living, for all live to him. Now, in Matthew 22, parallel passage. Matthew 22, verse 31, we have the words of Jesus by Matthew recorded this way. Concerning the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by God? So, in this case, we have, obviously, Jesus said Moses and God interchangeably. So when he spoke about what Moses wrote, he would say Moses wrote it, and he would say God wrote it. I think it was Chris, wasn't it? Wasn't it Chris teaching the class recently who made that point that we're going to read what the Holy Spirit said? And was it that Chris? You weren't in here. That's terrible. You know, I go to class. Or was that you? That was Jonathan. I knew it was one of our good deacons. So I think it was Jonathan then who said, sorry. Well, good company. But Jonathan made a very good observation. Sometimes you'll say, the Holy Spirit said. And Peter did that in Acts chapter 1. And sometimes we'll say the name of the author of that particular book that the Holy Spirit used or inspired to write that book. Jesus did that too. Sometimes you speak of Moses writing it. Sometimes God said it. Anyway, okay, I'm going to move on. Chapter 37. Any other question about chapter 36? Good. Verse 1. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Something you said a while ago about the non-Israelite nation.
Uh-huh.
Well, are the Jewish people considered a race of people?
Indeed.
What, Jacob and Esau were twins, brothers.
They were.
Esau?
Esau married Canaanite women.
I know, but still, were they not the same race?
They were.
The brothers were,
Yeah. Initially.
So they wouldn't have been, Esau and his family would not be considered Gentiles, would they? Or is Gentile just a term for anybody that's not a Jew?
Yeah, Esau was circumcised, I'm sure, but I don't know about his descendants. In fact, I'm sure his descendants were not. It was not until later, during the Maccabean period, I'm sure, when the Edomites, or the Idumeans, as they were called then, were wanting to unite with and amalgamate with the Israelites, and they adopted the law of Moses. For example, the Herods, they were of that family. They were descendants of Edom, or Esau. And they were, of course, puppets of the Roman Empire, but they were considered kings over Israel. But they had to be circumcised and had to keep the law. So they were proselyted in that sense. But they were not.
Circumcision what made you a Jew, not your race?
Well, there was a race of people called Jews, and they were descendants of Abraham through Isaac and then Jacob, or Israel. So you have the children of Israel, a specific group. Yes, there were many children of Abraham. All the Palestinians today and all the Arabs today are descendants of Abraham. They're not Jews, but they are descendants of Abraham. But they were not in that covenant. The covenant was made with the children of Israel. But there were others who could join in that covenant through circumcision and embracing the law. Even non-Abraham people, for fleshly Abraham is concerned. Anyone could align themselves. I mean, the Ethiopian eunuch, for example, would be one who probably was allowed to, but he was limited because the law of Moses limited eunuchs. They had limitations because he was a eunuch, which the law of Christ has, of course, done away with. Yes, Roger?
Didn't he described as a stranger at the gate in relationship to his
Who's he?
relationship, the Ethiopian noble?
Stranger at the gate? I suppose that, well, one you could describe him, yeah. I suppose that would be the case, yes.
He wasn't Jew, he was not able to worship because he was a eunuch.
He had limited access in that temple area, but he certainly would have had to be circumcised, but he would have had limited access because, according to the law of Moses, a eunuch could not have full access to the temple. He was considered a...
These people who are not Jews, they call the nations.
Yes.
They have interchange with the Gentiles.
That's right.
So the nations and the Gentiles were anyone who wasn't an Israelite.
So, have you seen that commercial about DNA? Have you seen that? You know, where people say, yeah, I'm Scottish, and they come to find out they're German, and they say, I'm German, and come to find out they're Irish, and I'm from West Africa, come to find out they're from South Africa. I mean, or you realize you've got genetic material in you from all over the world. And so, I mean, by the time we get to the monarchy in Israel, really, the Jewish people, I think it's fair to say, have pretty much kept themselves pure as a race of people, for the most part. Although Ruth was not a Jew. She was in the lineage of Jesus. Rahab was not a Jew. She was in the lineage of Jesus. So in that sense, they were not pure totally, but for the most part, males in particular, they could always trace their lineage back to Abraham. And that was an important thing to do. Yes, ma'am?
Were these nations the ones that when they came back from Egypt they had to deal with to
Oh, yeah.
get out of Canaan? Is that not these nations we're talking about now?
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. They dealt with them. Yes, ma'am. Do I?
You want to know if these were the nations?
That they dealt with? Yes, I heard her. I heard that. I did. I'm not even going to try to put any more syllables. I can't do it. I can't speak that. Whatever that is. Franian. Thank you. I can't speak Franian. Okay, that works. Okay. We have enough time to read chapter 37. Verse 2 really says it all. Everything from this point on is verse 2 of this chapter. That's what everything we're going to read in Genesis, even going into Exodus. This is the history of Jacob. Okay, look at verse 1. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph being, by the way, which son of Jacob was Joseph? What number? 11th. Okay. Ma'am? Next to the baby. Benjamin was the baby. The son of his favorite wife, Rachel. So Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." And his brother said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me." So he told it to his father and his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. His brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." So he said to him, "Here I am." He said to him, "Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me." So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, "What are you seeking?" So he said, "I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding the flocks." And the man said, "They have departed from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him.' We shall see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father." So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. They took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders passed by. By the way, this is an interesting point. Ishmaelite and Midianite are used interchangeably. I guess you see that, but that may confuse you, but those two terms are used interchangeably. And these are also descendants of Abraham. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes, and he returned to his brothers and said, "The lad is no more, and where shall I go?" Reuben was the oldest. That's why he was responsible, felt responsible, knew he would have to answer to his father. So he's really disturbed now. What you've done with him? So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "We found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, and he said, "I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Okay. Where do we begin in this very familiar and interesting chapter? I was raised in a home where my grandparents and parents went out of their way to prove that I was the favorite child in that family. I had a coat of many colors when I was growing up, and I had many dreams, and I shared them with my siblings. And they ripped my hair from me, and I am scarred to this day. Actually, I'm being facetious. I actually grew up in a home where my parents and grandparents went out of their way. At least they tried. They couldn't conceal their true love for me, but they tried to convince the others that they were on equal footing with me. But I'm sure if you were to ask Lisa or Lynn or Loretta or Philip, they would probably make the same claim that I'm now making. And I think that's how my parents wanted it to be. They did not want me to think I was better than anyone else, and that's fine. You did a good job. I don't think I'm better than anyone else in the family. So I think they succeeded in that venture. I think it's a dreadful mistake for a man to have more than one wife. Number one, if you got more than one wife, you already have a serious problem. But if you favor one wife over the other, you have a bigger problem. And when you have 11 children and you favor one over the others, you have a problem. If you have 2 children and you favor one over the other, you have a problem. Parents need to do everything they can to promote that kind of equality. Not socialism, but equal distribution of love and affection and attention and access as parents. I'm here for you just as much as I am for your siblings. And you're not favored over your siblings. And there's a very vital principle that I believe is taught in that from God. How many persons does God respect? He's not a respecter of persons, is he? So he judges each of us individually. I'm not sure why I got all the whipping from my brothers and sisters, but maybe that was one of the flaws. But then again, we don't have the omniscience that God does. And I was blamed by a lot of things that Lisa did, by the way. Many things. I want to make this observation. Here's Joseph. This is just one observation. And there's many that we could say in this chapter. But what we're reading about is the history of Jacob. And we already know the end of this story. We know where we're headed. We're headed to Egypt. And we know why we're headed to Egypt. We're headed there because there's about to be a terrible drought in the land because people were driving camels that were emitting O2 whatever and destroying the ozone, and there was a lot of global warming taking place in this period of history. And so I'm speaking to millennials now, and so they had to eventually move from Canaan into Egypt. Now, God knew that was going to happen. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. Here's Joseph out looking for his brother. Okay, we're going to say everything we can about Joseph in a minute. But he comes across some guy. Who's this guy? I don't know. But he's looking for his brother. This guy said, he just happened to come along some guy who just happened to know where his brothers were. Now, if he hadn't have found that guy, he probably would have gone back home and said, Daddy, I can't find them. I don't know where they are. And he wouldn't have been thrown in the pit, and he wouldn't have gone to Egypt. So he runs across this guy. Where'd this guy come from? Why is this guy out there wandering around? Why does this guy know where his brothers were? And what? You understand what I'm saying? Providence of God. At every single turn. Not to mention the favoritism from a father to his son of his old age. That's providential point marker number one. This flawed man mistreating his children. That's number one. Number two, the brat. And there's only one way to describe that. Some come to, oh no, Joseph was not perfect. He was a human being, and as a child, he was very immature. And he's proving his immaturity here. Were these dreams sent from God? Indeed they were. You see, God already knew what was going to happen. And he's telling Joseph in these dreams, this is going to happen. And his brothers are indignant. You think we're going to pout onto you? Well, indeed they will. Your father and mother, you think, well, but indeed he will. I mean, yeah, he's going to be prime minister of Egypt. Yes, you're going to bow before him one day. With his makeup on and bald head and everything, you're going to bow before him. Indeed you are. But they couldn't possibly know this. But God did. And he showed it to him in a dream. But now here's the immaturity of Joseph. He already knew he had to know because he's a tattletale. He's already been getting his brothers in trouble all the time. And his father's already given him the coat of many colors. He's not stupid. He had to know that his brothers didn't like him. And so what does he do? Oh, by the way, I had this dream. You're going to bow down to me one day. I mean, how do you explain that other than just simple immaturity? That doesn't mean that Joseph was a bad person. It means he's a brat. I mean, he's 17 years old. He hadn't grown up yet. And so we don't expect him to be perfect. We don't expect to do everything right. But what I'm trying to say, not to criticize him, not to belittle him, I'm simply making a point. Isn't it fascinating how God can take the simplest of things? I mean, there's flawed parenting. There's flawed behavior between siblings. These men hated their brother enough to kill him. God used their murderous rage to accomplish his purpose. Their envy to accomplish his purpose. He allowed Potiphar to buy him, to make him a slave. Now, you say, but what's Potiphar got to do with it? Potiphar's buying a human being who'd been wrested from his land, his homeland, his family, sold by his own brothers. I don't care how you slice it, that is inhumane. That is horrible treatment of another human being. And yet God is using that to accomplish. This is amazing. And we could go on all night. I mean, every facet of this. You say, well, where's the miracle here? There's nothing miraculous about any of this. But is it being orchestrated? Of course. Is God using people with all of their base and simple? Yes, he is. And we're going to see how God's going to use some really base behavior in the next chapter. It gets really bad. In fact, I'm almost embarrassed to read the next chapter in an open class. It's more than PG-13 kind of stuff, but we're going to have to read that because it's biblical narrative, and we're going to read it. But God is using that to bring his own son into the world. I'm not trying to suggest to you that we ought to just go out there and live any way we want to, the Mardi Gras approach to life, and not worry about it. But what I'm saying, isn't it fascinating that God's will always prevails? And when Jesus was crucified and when he was buried, don't you imagine the demons were dancing in hell? Look what we did. We killed the Son of God. And on the third day, when he came from the grave, who has the last laugh? Who's really in charge? And I think there's really some comfort to be gained in that, because sometimes our own individual lives seem so spiraling out of control. And we don't understand, why did this happen to me? And why is this horrible thing encountered? How am I going to answer this? How am I going to deal with that? And did God abandon me? Did God give up on me? We haven't even gotten to the Joseph narrative yet. I mean, you start looking at things from Joseph's perspective. I mean, wow. I mean, God's going to let this happen to me? And yet, at the end of his life, Joseph would say all of this happened because God saved a nation of people alive. That's profound. And we can say that God is allowing sometimes terrible and inexplicable things to happen to us. And you say, why would God allow that to happen to me? I don't know. But I do know this. We need to learn to trust that God is going to work it out for our good. We often misread Romans chapter 8. We know that all things work together for good to those who love the Lord, to those who are called according to his purpose. We read that and we say, we know that all things that happen to me are good. That's not what Paul said. What he said was, we know that all things work together for good. All things. What things? Death, dismemberment, tragedy, sickness, illness, betrayal. I mean, all terrible things. Persecution. These things all eventually work out for our salvation. And so we see that illustrated in the life of Jacob. And we're looking at this and we're going to say, this is the story of Joseph. It's not. It's the story of Jacob. Jacob is the preeminent one. This is his family, Israel. These are the children of Israel. And Joseph is important in this narrative because Joseph is the vessel that God uses to save Jacob's family. Israel is saved through through Joseph. That's why Joseph is important right now. But this is the history of Jacob. And that's what we're reading. And we're going to continue reading that to the end of the book of Genesis. And so, yes, sir?
It's amazing when you think about the providence of God. Here in this story, you got 70 people
Yes.
who leave the land of milk and honey.
Yes.
Go down into Egypt, where they become a mighty nation.
Yes.
God protected them from the roving bands
Yes.
that were in that area.
He did.
No doubt they would have been destroyed or at least weakened if he hadn't done that.
And there was a lot of paganism in Egypt, but apparently the kind and the brand of paganism there was not nearly as much of a threat as the one in Canaan. The Canaanites were so corrupt that God actually used the Israelites as his instruments of wrath to judge those nations because their sin had finally come to full fruition. Apparently Egypt, as bad as it was, wasn't nearly as bad or as great a threat. And God knew that too and was able to use their time in Egypt to preserve them religiously as well as physically. Yes, ma'am?
I was reading on a little bit ahead, and it was talking about Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and it said that they were brought up at Joseph's knee. So does that mean he taught them about God?
They were brought up as yes, he taught them, trained them, indeed.
Because they became part of.
That's the next question.
Yeah.
Said I read ahead.
So Ephraim and Manasseh were two, but when the land was divided, the Levites got no portion. And so part of it went through Manasseh, through Joseph, and then part of it through Ephraim, which took the place of Levi. Indeed it is. Ma'am?
When Jacob asked Joseph, "Is your mother?" and I talked about that, I thought she was already dead. He was 30.
That's a good question. Well, he was 17.
But it's
The dream had occurred.
That's what I'm saying. That might have been before then.
This is earlier.
probably was a little boy.
Could have been, yeah. But he was
She
17.
died in childbirth with Benjamin. Yeah.
Yeah, but there was no Benjamin at this point, was there? And we read about that, but what we read about earlier was just an overview of events that are just like a collage. They're not necessarily in chronological order. Your song.
Eight,
835 in your song books, please. Saturday, March the 11th, 2017, Camp Negahi, the annual Paul Bunyan breakfast will take place. It's the open camp day. It's a time for, well, good fellowship, but also a time to get the camp open and ready for the new season. If you have any questions about this, please see Danny Spain. He'll be glad to assist you with any of those questions before you leave tonight. And we'll be sure and post this on our bulletin board. Our sympathy, of course, is extended today to the family of Daryl and Samantha Smith and the passing of Daryl's mother yesterday. Visitation is taking place as we speak at the J. Collins Funeral Home, and the funeral will be tomorrow at J. Collins at 11 o'clock in the morning. The family is requesting no food, please, to be provided. Daryl was very, very kind about that and wanted me to convey to you how much he appreciates the offer for food from his heart. He said, I appreciate this, but really we don't have any room anymore for any more food. So he's restraining us not out of any ingratitude. He wants us to know that, but because they just don't have the room, and we certainly understand that. And certainly our sympathy is extended to his family. Don't forget Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. The deacons are asking us to be here. They have work for us to do at the building. The elders also want you to be here this coming Saturday morning to to help in preparation for the gospel meeting. So we're going to have simultaneous things going on. There's work for everybody, so no one will be left out. We'll have something good to do. One of those things will be to help follow up on some of the Dorcas clients that we have and giving them personal invitation to our meeting. Some have already done that. In fact, in the process of doing that, we did get someone we want to add to the prayer list. Roy Pitts is one of our Dorcas recipients. He was in an accident and has hurt his neck and is going to be in a neck brace for the next 8 weeks and is asking for our prayers, and certainly want to accommodate that request. Also, again, Daryl and Samantha in the loss of his mother. Kate Bosworth continues to recover at home. Cooper Mitchell, Sonia Brooks' new grandbaby, continues in the hospital after a week due to problems with oxygen levels. And we certainly want to remember little Cooper in our prayers. Tammy Howard also is continuing to struggle severely as a result of her surgery. Gallbladder, of course, removed, and there have been complications as a result of that. And we certainly want to remember Tammy in our very special way. My daughter Lydia and son-in-law Jordan and their children are not with us tonight because they're sick and didn't want to share that with us, and we're grateful for that, but sorry for them and want to remember them in our prayers. Also, don't forget, of course, Sunday our gospel meeting begins with Brother Charles Cochran from the East Ridge congregation in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the gospel meeting will go through Thursday evening. And don't forget, this Sunday afternoon we'll be meeting at 2 o'clock. Also, between services Sunday we'll be having, of course, our fellowship meal, and we all need to be a part of that. Then through the week we're going to be feeding the preacher as usual, and that will be as follows. On Monday evening, Chris Johnson's group is going to be serving Italian food. Really? Okay. Tuesday, Jonathan Cunningham's group is going to be serving potluck. Wednesday, Adam's group is going to be serving potluck. And then Thursday, the elders and their wives are going to be serving something. Well, potluck. Yeah, hard luck. We'll see what happens Thursday. But there are postcards on the table in the foyer you can use for invitations. Please do that. Also, a baby shower box in the foyer for Olivia and Brian Johnson. They're expecting a baby boy in April. Suggested items include gift cards, diapers, and wipes. So if you can help in any of these things, please do that. Are there any other announcements we need to make? Yes, sir?
If anyone didn't have a chance to sign the Bibles for Patrick and Marina, it's down in the foyer, the one that we had for the anniversary. Sorry. So it's out there if anybody still needs to sign it.
Thank you. And I want to again say publicly how grateful I am, and on behalf of Regina, how grateful we both are on the wonderful surprise we had this past Lord's Day. It was a tremendous outpouring, and it means a great deal to us. And I want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. It really was a great honor. And it's a very nice Bible. And I was going to use it tonight, but I was told we need to leave it on the table in the foyer so that others could sign it. And appreciate what my sisters said in it already and others who've signed it. So if you'd like to sign it, please feel free to say whatever it is you want to say about whatever you want to say. And so your song of invitation again was?
835.
Number 835. Your song of invitation.